Hey, good morning and welcome back, and today we'll be talking about the Twin Cities Hiawatha, which was one of the trains that ran the Milwaukee Road from the beginning of the Streamline era through to the end of passenger operations in 1971. The Twin Cities Hiawatha ran the busy corridor between Chicago, Milwaukee, and the Twin Cities, which was filled with very stiff competition that included the twice-daily Twin Cities Zephyr on the Burlington route and its overnight Blackhawk, along with the Chicago Northwestern's Twin Cities 400 and its overnight Northwest Limited. This doesn't include the plethora of local trains that ran in this part of the country, and the long-distance trains such as the Empire Builder's North Coast. The Empire Builder and the North Coast Limited run by the Great Northern and Northern Pacific, which the Burlington route shuffled between St. Paul and Chicago. The Hiawatha, as it was originally called, eventually spawned a whole fleet of Hiawathas that served the Midwest and even the transcontinental Olympian Hiawatha, which was discussed in a past video. The Milwaukee Road started out in a very similar manner as the Chicago Northwestern. It was one small route that was chartered to connect a small town with Milwaukee that eventually was merged with more railroads and reorganized into the Milwaukee and St. Paul Railroad in 1867. The original railroad, by the way, was formed in 1850 to connect, hopefully I pronounce this reasonably right, Waukesha, Wisconsin with Milwaukee. And it was extended over the Mississippi River fairly quickly. The railroad continued to grow in Wisconsin and extended into neighboring Minnesota and eventually to the Upper Peninsula. And in 1872, the Milwaukee Road, which it was still called by then, was eyeing to extend a line from Milwaukee to Chicago, since by that point Chicago had become the primary rail hub in this part of the country. This also made it one of the biggest centers of trade in the U.S. outside of New York. One thing that was eventually built in Chicago by the Chicago Northwestern was a warehouse for potatoes and other produce that essentially served as a trading center for the whole U.S. So in 1872, the Milwaukee Road started building south and quickly crossed the state line into Illinois, and the line into Chicago was finished 2 years later in 1874, when the Milwaukee and St. Paul Railroad added Chicago to its name. Now, the Milwaukee Road didn't connect or build any major towns along its route into Chicago, but it did help a bunch of, frankly, now important towns establish themselves. Towns such as Morton Grove, Libertyville, Fox Lake, Deerfield, and Janesville ended up getting their own lines or connected to a main Milwaukee Road line and a connection to Chicago. All of these towns weren't on the main line, or not all of them were, but they did get branch lines as time went on, such as Fox Lake, Janesville, and Libertyville. They all kind of got connected to the main Milwaukee Road line, which put them on the map, as the Milwaukee Road did eventually start commuter and regular passenger trains along its route. Fox Lake at one point had 7 round trips per day in the mid-1930s. This route also hosted trains that ran to the Twin Cities and other parts of the Midwest. Most of these trains ran as unnamed trains until the late 1800s, when the Pioneer Limited was launched. So the Pioneer Limited, which was the first named train on the Milwaukee Road, and it ran between the Chicago and the Twin Cities on an overnight schedule. And this was as I mentioned, it's the first named train on the Milwaukee Road, and one of the first in the United States, and served as its flagship train until the launch of the Hiawatha in 1935. The Pioneer Limited held all other firsts on this route. It was the first named train on the Chicago Twin Cities route. It was also the first train to run with sleeping cars and have steam heating and electricity, and to carry mail for the post office. The train had a lot of firsts. It was a very, very big and important train. This train also tended to run with 2 sections until the Depression because of how popular it was. This stopped when the Milwaukee Road bought stronger engines, and I'm guessing traffic also dipped a little bit because of the Depression. But the newer engines could pull 2 sections. Its heavyweight consist had reclining coach seats, standard sleepers, a buffet lounge for smokers, and a dining car. The train also was upgraded over time, and it was eventually supplied with homemade cars and closed Pullman sleepers, and of which they were lightweight and streamlined. The ones the Milwaukee Road built themselves. They were actually one of the few railways that actually did that, had the capacity to build their own cars as well as ordered some from Pullman. So in 1935, the Milwaukee Road began upgrading its service along the Twin Cities Chicago route. The streamline craze was getting off the ground at this point, specifically with the launch of the Burlington Zephyrs and the Union Pacific City Fleet. Most railroads in the U.S. were starting to plan new streamlined services at this time. Trains such as the Rock Island Rockets were being launched. The Southern Pacific on the other side of the country was planning to launch the Coast Daylight and the Lark. Milwaukee Road was also hot on the case of launching its own train. The Chicago-St. Paul route was, at this point, one of the busiest routes in the country. And in this period of planning, they knew that Burlington was going to launch a route, so the Milwaukee Road and the Chicago Northwestern decided to upgrade their own lines to run faster trains, and these upgrades allowed them to run trains between the two cities in 6.5 hours, which reduced the schedule down from 10 hours, so they saved about 3.5 hours in total. As mentioned before, the other railways were hot on the chase. By the spring of 1935, the Burlington had launched the Twin Cities Zephyr, and the Chicago Northwestern had launched the Twin Cities 400, and a few months after that, the Milwaukee Road launched the Hiawatha. The name comes from a poem about Chief Hiawatha that notes that he is faster than his own arrow, which was meant to convey that the train was fast. Obviously, the Milwaukee Road was also trying to pay homage to the Indian tribes in the area. The train ran originally with 6 cars, which had 3 coaches, a lounge called the Tip Top Tap Lounge car, a standard parlor car, and the Beavertail Lounge. Hopefully I've popped the Beavertail Lounge up. They changed over time, by the way, and I'll hopefully mention that as time goes on. The coach cars were designed and built in-house by the Milwaukee Road, and the painting and the interior was designed by industrialist Otto Kohler, who helped design the Baltimore and Ohio's Capital Limited. And the Hiawatha was noted for its, again, very fast run. It ran at 100 miles an hour in some place, and there were a handful of reduced to 90 signs along the line, in areas where the infrastructure could only handle a train running 90 miles an hour. This train proved so popular that by 1939, the train required a second section be added to the schedule, and this meant the train was renamed in the most unique naming convention of all time, of having the morning section being called the Morning Hiawatha and the afternoon section be called the Afternoon Hiawatha. And yeah, I am being a little bit sarcastic, as literally every train in the country that had 2 sections did something like this. Very unoriginal naming back then. I mean, I don't know, is it really different than us just saying it all would just be the Hiawatha and just the numbers are different? I don't know. Did make their schedules a bitch to look at, though, I will say that much. So during this time, the train was lengthened to 9 cars. The train was given an extra coach, an extra parlor car, a full dining car to support the lounge, and the Milwaukee Road maintained high ridership and high levels of service through the war years. The Milwaukee Road became known for its dining car service during this period of time. A menu from the 1960s shows that the Hiawatha still had 3 meal options on its lunch menu, which was pretty standard for a dining car menu in the 60s, but it also, on top of that, had 6 different sandwiches, a few different salad options, drinks, and even a bar menu, which by then, most railways had pretty much eliminated as much dining service as they could get away with without pissing off everybody. And I think by then the SP had largely gone to using automats, excluding on some of its longest trains in the system, like the Sunset Limited and the trains that ran with the Union Pacific. So following the war, the train was dieselized like the rest of the Milwaukee Road, at least the part that wasn't electric. Because remember, at this point, the Milwaukee Road still did have the electric sections in Montana and Washington. Yeah, and that little bit of Idaho. Anyways, another addition to the fleet on the Twin Cities route was new Pullman sleeping cars for the Pioneer Limited. Before this, the Pioneer Limited basically got hand-me-down cars from the other trains running the network. But that was also largely for coaches. They still ran with its heavyweight sleepers at this point. And this is frankly, the first time the train had received its new cars in a very long time, frankly, all the way back to the 20s, at least when it was post-war. And the sleepers came from Pullman. I don't think the Milwaukee Road ordered from anyone other than Pullman. There's probably some straggler cars from ACF, but I think they were almost exclusively Pullman if they didn't build them themselves. These cars were added because the new sleepers were bought from Pullman to outfit the Olympian Hiawatha, and at the time they had invested $16 million in new cars following the war because they thought modern trains would help them sustain the post-war traffic, but unfortunately this didn't help them because traffic still declined on their trains just like it did for every other railroad, more or less. But before we get into the decline years, let's talk about some of the other secondary Hiawatha trains that ran along the Milwaukee Road. The first to be launched was the North Woods Hiawatha. This train ran from Chicago to, I'm hopefully pronouncing this kind of right, Minocqua, Wisconsin in the summer months, and ran out of Milwaukee in the off-season. This train didn't serve a very busy corridor, so it's kind of weird that the Milwaukee Road chose this route as its first secondary route to host a Hiawatha, at least from a modern perspective. The reason this line was served with a first-class train was because it was a vacation area that people from Chicago wanted to get to and still do travel to. Transportation may have changed, but the where people are going really kind of hasn't. They were also competing with the Chicago and Northwestern, who was upgrading some of their services in the area around the same time. So in that light, it kind of makes sense that they would have launched a Hiawatha into an area where they were going to be facing upgraded competition. The second of these Hiawathas to be launched was the Chippewa Hiawatha. This train went into Michigan's Upper Peninsula and ran between Chicago, Milwaukee, Green Bay, and Iron Mountain, which was in the Upper Peninsula. This train was launched with secondhand equipment that was handed down from the Twin Cities Hiawatha as the new cars came in for its morning and afternoon runs in 1939. This train was also launched, it was launched in 1938, and it was launched 2 months after the Northwoods Hiawatha was launched. Both of these trains started facing declines quickly following the war, since these areas were rural, and as mentioned in a few other videos, they tended to get good roads quickly. So by 1956, the Northwoods Hiawatha lost its name, and the Chippewa also had been cut back by 1960 and lost its own name. And these trains were all but gone by 1970, so they didn't see the coming of Amtrak, unfortunately. And the last of the secondary Hiawathas was the Midwest Hiawatha, which was launched in December of 1940. This train ran between Chicago and Omaha with a section to Sioux Falls. This train was also a prelude to the Milwaukee Road handling the UP City fleet after 1955. The Midwest Hiawatha did more or less disappear from the schedule as an independent train after 1955, since the UP ran a lot of passenger trains between Omaha and Chicago. Also, I have mentioned the Chicago and Northwestern losing the UP passenger trains to the Milwaukee Road in basically every video that involves the UP, but never really explained why. The Chicago and Northwestern at the time was going through its own bout of deferred maintenance, and the quality of its track had declined so badly that maintaining the schedule between Chicago and Omaha was becoming harder. Not only that, but the ride was rough for the passengers, which the UP didn't want on its passenger trains, which they basically still were after Omaha, despite the UP technically not running them. The Milwaukee Road's route was in far better shape at the time than the Chicago and Northwestern's was. Not to mention the Milwaukee Road was far more obsessed with providing a first-rate service, along with it being quick and timely, which the UP also wanted. So on that note, it's also my opinion that they would have dumped the SP on the western end if they could have, but the Western Pacific didn't serve Reno, which was a major tourist destination, and they also ran the legs of the competing California Zephyr, so that was also, they were kind of stuck with the SP, unfortunately. So the decline and cancellation of the Milwaukee Road's passenger trains also seemed to have come all at once, just like the Rock Island passenger trains did. So between 1967 and 1970, the Milwaukee Road had dropped down to only having the morning Hiawatha run out of its former fleet of Hiawathas and the Pioneer. The afternoon Hiawatha was canceled in January of 1970, and the Pioneer was gone by September, and the other Hiawathas were all gone by 1969, even as unnamed trains. Other than the Hiawatha, the Milwaukee Road was just carrying the UP City of Everywhere between Chicago and Omaha. And these days, there are still trains running the old Milwaukee Road, which is the Empire Builder running between Chicago and St. Paul. And one of the things Amtrak did do was reroute the Empire Builder over the Milwaukee Road's route to serve Milwaukee. And Amtrak also did run the North Coast Hiawatha along the route on a Hiawatha to the Twin Cities for a brief moment, and the North Star, which ran all the way to Duluth. And at this point, I do think, and I do know that Amtrak and Minnesota are planning to add service along the Chicago-St. Paul run on the old Milwaukee and Chicago Northwestern route, which hopefully I will have pushed out a video talking about the Amtrak 2035 map by the time this goes live. And that's basically going to be the end of this. And the rest of this is basically just going to be a commercial for upcoming videos and whatnot. So the next video to be lined up is going to probably be the city of Denver, followed by my aforementioned a few times in a few videos, my ripoff of Well, Here's Your Problem on the Granger Railroads, which is going to come out at least tentatively scheduled for September 30th. May or may not get pushed back a couple weeks, depending on how quickly it gets made, because at time of writing, time of recording this, I'm still doing research on it, and still have not decided when exactly to release that. So again, apologies for ripping them off, but it's going going to be a thing. And I know it's not really an engineering disaster. It's a business failure or business disaster. Anyways, it's not engineering related as to why they failed entirely. It's mostly down to management being incompetent, but were competent in the case of the ones that survived longer or in more better shape. But anyways, not getting into that. That's coming in September 30th, maybe early October. The next video is going to be the city of Denver, which will probably be followed by either the Rocky Mountain Rocket or the Colorado Eagle. So anyways, I hope you do enjoy, and we'll stick around for the next one. And do the like, share, subscribe, commenting, telling me how bad I am at recording these. But anyways, I'll see you in the next one, hopefully. And do enjoy and have a good afternoon.